Jesus' name, amen. All right, I am just really excited that we have these guests. Chris Hardej was in the tower, and you will not be able to hear or from and talk to someone who was in the tower very often. So we're really privileged, and Dr. Gordon Huie is here also. He was right there at ground zero. And so they're going to talk to us and share some things from really on the ground, on the spot situation. So thank you. I'm going to give you the time. They will leave a little time for questions. So if you do have some things that come up, they have assured me that you'll be able to ask those.
Thank you much. It turns out that for me to talk about the Trade Center, I do have to talk about, but give it a little background myself so you have some understanding of who I am. I'm ex-military, or I am military. Back in the late 80s, picture when Top Gun came out, the original. You had Goose and Maverick, or the other way around, Maverick and Goose. I was Goose. I was in an F4 when it came out. You can talk about having a big head at the time. And actually, my front seater, I had dinner with him last night because he's from Elgin, Nebraska, living in Hastings. So they got to have a little reunion yesterday. But it turned out that when 1990s came, there was a drawdown in the military where I had to come back home. My hometown is Brooklyn. And it turned out that I had to get a civilian job, where I got a job with the New York State Department of Transportation, which was a paper job in the Trade Center. And it turned out that I really missed flying with the boys back then. The camaraderie, even within the rescue community, the camaraderie is like as such. And it turned out that I got back into the New York Air National Guard. Now it turns out that if you've seen the movie The Perfect Storm, we're down to 130 refueling the helicopters. We lost a helicopter that time. But it turns out that, interesting.
Just tap close on the screen.
Here you go.
Or use the
Boom.
mouse. There you go.
So it turns out that, but with the military there, I used to fly once a week. And actually part-time is 120 days a year. But my full-time civilian job here, like 40 hours a week, was like I mentioned at the Trade Center. And look at that skyline. The two towers define the skyline from anywhere within New York. You see this little building here? That's 22 stories. That's bigger than your Capitol downtown there. You know, not to belittle the Capitol, it's just to show the magnificence of these two towers that were there within downtown. But it turns out it was more than just two towers. Everyone thinks the Twin Towers was just Twin Towers. No, we had tower number 1, tower number 2, and then we had towers 3, 4, 5 that you don't see on the outside, and towers number 6. And underneath the plaza, since you had that many people, you had a mall. It was the third largest grocery mall in America at the time, because you had that many people. And of course, you had all these corridors that connected all the buildings in the underground mall. Not only did you have 25,000 people in each tower, but it turned out you had 100,000 people that gone through this transit center. As you can see a picture of the mall on the bottom there. And then above is another feature that we had in the Trade Center. On the 106th, 107th floor, we had Windows of the World. It was a 5-star restaurant. Look at that view. It was a magnificent view. For the towers were 110 stories tall each. Now it turned out you can either come into the top, the mezzanine level, which is street level on one side, and then down below is where you go down. That's how you come in from the mall level. And you take the elevators right there on the far right. Where that day I took the elevator up to the 82nd floor. And I know from the band on the building here, that's the 78th floor, so I'm over here on the 82nd floor. Actually, the plane came in from the north. Remember that picture you saw looking out the restaurant? That's looking to the north. That's the direction the plane came in from. And and that's coming into this side here. And it's a good thing with that beautiful view that I had that I'm not always looking out the window there, because if I saw that huge plane coming at me, who knows what frame of mind I would be in today. I actually work with my back to the window. And being a flyer, I know that when a plane is going that quick, you don't hear it until it's above you. All I heard was a not even 2 seconds, a quick rush of wind, like a quick whoo. And as it slammed into the building, it pushed the building forward, and then the building sprang back. Wow. Now, believe it or not, it didn't seem so bad at the time, but I guarantee you, like you sitting on a chair with wheels, I had wheels, I'm there leaning on the desk, the building slid out from underneath me. And I know that's true because my coworkers on the far end of the building, they got knocked to the floor with everything. And my coworkers on the side of the building would later tell me how they saw the walls bend and spring back. But I didn't know that. I'm just sitting there at my desk after this happened, and I'm trying to digest, figure out what happened, and I think even a bomb went off because it happened before. Well, speaking of, after that, I just got up out of my seat to turn around and look out the window there, and you see all this paper and metal shard fluttering into the ground, kind of like a ticker tape parade. And it turns out that pretty much like that, but without the fireball. I'm on the other side. And I remember thinking, boy, you don't see this much. And well, first of all, let me backtrack just a minute, because this is not the first attack on the Trade Center. February '93 was very prominent for several things, but one, back then, they loaded up a van full of explosive fertilizer and pulp. We had everything. We had underground parking, several levels, and they blew up the building from down there. 6 people were killed, 7 if you include the unborn child going on maternity leave the very next day, which never came for her. But no matter how bad that event was, like every disaster, there's lessons learned. Now, one of those lessons are fire drills. I'm sure they had fire drills before February '93, but every 6 months now, whether you like it or not, they ring the bell, you go to the front door, you wait for directions, and then you go in to look at the stairwell, the 3 stairwell, and then you go back to work. This was a fire drill for real. So it turned out that when the impact happened, looked out the window there, and like I said, I saw the paper and metal shard, and you're mesmerized. You just want to stay and watch. And that's when my military training kicked in, because from that moment on, I was so focused in terms of the next 5 things I would have to constantly do until I get home. Just thinking ahead, whatever the 5 things are, just thinking ahead. And it turns out that, again, getting to those fire drills, yeah, it's a fire drill, but for real. So I go to the front door and I wait for directions, and there are none. And I look in the hallway there, and it's dark and smoky. And I wouldn't know until many months later, the secretary said, yeah, a huge fireball came down the hall. And it's a good thing we kept the door closed to protect the secretaries on the other side of the door there. Now, I didn't have to go far. It's probably a little past the door to the room here. But I didn't want to go out into the dark until I heard somebody from over there say, come to my voice. Come to my voice, in a deep, bellowing voice. And that's all I needed to hear, to go out into the dark, turn where I thought the stairs were, and sure enough, that's where they were. Now, it turns out I talked about the fire drills and the corridor there being smoke-filled. But the first thing is when I got in the stairs, nobody's coming down. Where is everybody? There's 28 floors above me. We now know the impact zones, the 93rd to 99th floor, where nobody, 10 floors above me, which is not far at all, made it out. So nobody more than 10 floors would get out of the building or would make it. Turned out the moment that plane entered, 1,360 people associated with tower number 1 there will be doomed. But I don't know that. I'm just running down the stairs looking at the big numbers, 75, 74, as you're working your way on down. And then it turns out that when you get to the upper 60s, everyone has the same idea in terms of getting out of the building. And you're measuring a step at a time. And then it's just human gridlock. Where I'm lining up against the banister here, and I go, let me go take a look between the banisters there, and I can see hundreds of arms and elbows for as far as I can see, because it's just an endless line of people going all the way on down. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, he's standing there on the stairs, these Snapples just popped up coming up the stairs. This is long before COVID, where you just take a swig and pass it up the line. But it's amazing how these Snapples came out of nowhere. By the way, I found out much later, I saw a broken Snapple machine. I guess they knew they weren't going to use that machine anymore. Well, and that's another thing. Use your resources that you got available around you. Well, it turned out that while we're standing there on the stairs, there was nothing you can do but talk to the neighbor that's next to you. Whoop, there was a 93, here we go again. Although I wasn't there in 93, a lot of people were evacuating for the second time. So that was quite common to hear in the stairwell. Now about that time, the other tower got hit, tower number 2. Plane came in the opposite direction. Those two towers are so close to each other, but I don't recall hearing the impact. But another lesson learned is back in 93, there was a lack of communication. There was no information. This time we had the host agency people in the stairwell with us with radios, or walkie-talkies. So it's like that, even though I didn't hear the impact, I knew immediately what happened from the message traffic over the radio. Another huge lesson learned in terms of why I'm even here talking to you is the stairs were lit. Back in 93, the stairs were not lit. It took 6 to 8 hours to evacuate. I didn't have 6 to 8 hours. I had 1 hour. The stairs was lit all the way on down. Huge lesson learned in terms of from 93. Now we work our way down to the 44th floor. It's a sky lobby. That's where you change elevators. Even though we're not using elevators, they want us out of this stairwell into a different stairwell. And it turns out that, like a small door like that, there's 150 people trying to get out, this little tiny door to go down the stairs. And I'm in the back of the park watching this, and I see a nice empty big stairwell behind me. What do you think I do? I look at my boss, I give him the old head nod, and we go running down those stairs. And we thought we'd done good, until we turned the 40th floor there, only to see the back end of human gridlock. New lesson learned, old lesson we learned is, do what you're told. Those who waited for the little tiny store there would get out 15 minutes ahead of us, which would make a huge difference. But it turned out what they were doing, first of all, look at how wide the stairs is. And what they were doing is trying to keep these stairs open for the injured. So as you're standing there side by side, you hear them say, move to the right, whoever's coming out. Move on over, and you see the injured. You keep on going back and forth every time you hear move to the right. Well, it turned out that the worst one I seen was a lady pretty much full body burn, particularly from the waist up, coming down like a mummy holding out the burns, because I guess the most comfortable way she can be. But my boss, being the compassionate person he is, sees that she's unescorted, all by herself. So as she's coming on down the stairs, he goes to give her a hand. And that's the last thing you want to do to a burn victim as she yelled from the pain. But he ended up helping her out of the building that day. And it wasn't, I told that story many a times when I give a couple tours, and it wasn't until 12 years later I started second guessing myself. I go, you remember that lady? I saw him down at the anniversary day. I go, remember that lady that you helped out of the building? I remember her hair was braided, kind of like in cornrows. Come to think of it, her hair wasn't braided, was it? It wasn't. That's the way the hair ended up on her head that day. So getting back to the stairways here, a short while later we get to see the first firefighters coming up the stairs. And they're huffing and puffing, probably like mid-30s. I huff and puff going up 2 flights of stairs, so that tells you what they've been going through. But look how close they are. And he's even closer than he is now. He's coming by, you're looking him in the eye because you got nothing better to do than wait your turn. And they're looking you in the eye because they got these 1,000 steps ahead of them. What do you possibly tell them other than good luck that he probably heard 1,000 times going up the stairs? You pretty much had all lost for words except, again, the occasional good luck. Once they all pass by, it turns out that we're probably down to about the 20th floor now. And there's really nobody in front of us. I'm with 2 coworkers, Jan and Larissa, where we run down the last 20 flights of stairs to get to the lobby and see the true devastation, where it looked like a bomb went off, glass everywhere, and everybody's seen shiny metal elevator doors. I bet you none of you seen an elevator door just melted back on itself, just melted right off. And I have no idea how the elevators are working, but I see that last elevator full of firefighters getting right up to the 44th floor. And I'm thinking, boy, those guys are lucky. Because once they get off the elevator on the 44th floor, guess who's coming out of the stairs? Somebody who just walked up 44 flights of stairs. Only to realize how lucky those guys probably were. Bet you some of those names are on the memorial. So here I am in the, getting ready to leave my building. Like I do all the time when I leave work, I'm just gonna go straight down that corridor. I'm just gonna go straight down this corridor into the subway at the end of the corridor there. And like I said, it's a bunch of corridors that connect the buildings. I could look right down to this corridor into tower number 2 as I pass the Banana Republic, one of the stores down there. There's actually a coffee bar over there. And no sooner am I just, coming right out of the building, looking down the corridor, and as soon as I pass 30 feet past that corridor there, I hear a rush of wind. And I look over my shoulder to see this billowing cloud of dust. And it's amazing how fast the mind thinks, because as I start to hear some noise and see that dust cloud, I know I want to be against a column. And I know there's no columns down there, but I know the wall would do. So I instinctively start to run over there, about that far away. And as soon as I turn, windows even bigger than that window right there, 2 of them on each side of the wall start flying out toward me. And I made a bet to myself, I can get between that window and grab that wall, which is exactly what happened. Well now, this is coming down on top of us, the first class, tower number 2, as I'm standing in the underground wall. You get to the wall, well, let me see. Well, first of all, with the tower coming down, it's crushing everything, people's walls, chairs, computers, like a plunger pushing this stuff through. I guarantee you, those people in the corridor behind me, they did not get out. They got smacked up against the coffee bar with everything coming out of tower number 2. I'm around the corner, you get to the wall, you close your eyes because it's, first of all, it goes dark. Close your eyes because you're getting sandblasted by all this stuff. And I mean, you grab the wall so tight and you think, so this is what it feels like to die. Well, I'm not dead yet. Your mind starts to get back into the survival mode. But they say the towers came down in 10 to 12 seconds. Like, really? That's 10 floors a second. Well, I'm sure they studied the tapes many, many times. But what I can tell you afterwards, it was the most peaceful, quiet you'll ever hear. Because I didn't hear a peep, I didn't hear a moan, I heard nothing. And when I finally opened my eyes, there was one little tiny light here. I called for my buddy Jan to come to the light. He couldn't see the light. He wasn't that far. Come to my voice, come to my voice. He's right behind, no, he comes out of the dark. Larissa, my other coworker, is right behind him. You get 2 guys coming this way saying we gotta go this way. I go, what are you kidding me? I know exactly where I am, stuck to the wall. We gotta go this way. They admitted how disoriented they were. So then I moved around a little to see what I can see, and really couldn't see much. And where I stopped, you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. But I sensed there's a group of people around me. And I started thinking aloud, particularly to Jan, in terms of, okay, we got 2 choices. We wait to get rescued, or walk out of here. Whatever it was bad, so we better get walking. And some lady said I cannot walk. I knew immediately what she meant. I don't know how many ladies are gonna walk down 80-something flights of stairs, or even 5 flights of stairs with heels. They were all discarded along the side of the stairs as you're going on down. I saw the glass go flying in the mall before the lights went out. You put the 2 together in your head, I'm about to offer my back when some other guy said, hop on my back. That's all I needed to hear because I knew she was taken care of. So then I want to get going. And I get these people behind me because we're doing kind of like a conga line there. And I'm doing a mine walk because I know there's several floors of parking down below. I want to make sure there's some floor here and not a hole that I can't see and me end up in the parking lot. So as I'm walking in the dark, I kick something. You can't see what it is. That's something I walked into is at least up to my knees. I just walked into it. And as I got down really low, it's those huge overhead signs, the directional signs that hang from the ceiling of the mall, blowing off the ceiling now, laying down on the ground, and I gotta go all the way around. I get halfway through the underground mall, I hear somebody in the far distance say, "Come to the light, come to the light." He said it twice and that was it. Well, of course, I don't see the light. But I yelled to him, "Keep talking, I hear your voice, but I can't see the light." Sure enough, he heard me because then he started up with the "come to the light" again. Where I eventually got to the guy with the light, and 3 firefighters right next to him. And I can see an exit behind them. Not close, it's not far, but I see a little daylight. But when I get there, the 3 firefighters said, "Send them up the escalator." For some gut reason, even I really don't know everything going on, I have a gut feeling that going up the escalator ain't gonna be the right answer because I know it's gonna take me back to the plaza outside between the 2 buildings. Somehow I had a feeling that was, a gut feeling that that was not the right place to be. But when the 3 firefighters said that, the original rescuer made it easy for me. He said, "No bleeping way." And that's all I needed to hear because I bolted past the 4 of them for the exit that I could see, which was not too far away again. Actually, I'll get to the pictures later. But it turns out that when I would find out later there was actually 10 to 12 people behind me as I got out. But I'm looking at Jan, he wants to make a phone call. And Lewis's in La La Land. And I'm thinking, what are you, too crazy? I'm picturing big sheets of glass coming down, and nothing good can come of that. So I pretty much had to do was push him along like a whole half a block, you know, keep him going, where we turned around the corner, and we stopped about 4 to 5 blocks away to look back for the first time and try to find out what's going on. And see a sight you really don't see, 1 tower. And if you know I worked on 82nd floor with the hole near the top of the tower there, that was not good. We turned to walk away, we heard the rush of wind again. We ran. We didn't even look. We knew what it was. 30 people in my office, 3 will not make it out. Jan Lewis and I were probably the last 3 people from my office to leave the complex alive. This is just pretty much Tom talking about how I got out, but this top picture here is one of the stores was down in the mall where I was. That was a little further away, so where I was a little bit worse. And you can see how bad that looked. You can see kind of like one of the poles, that's something the wall that I would have grabbed. And you can see how tall those windows are as they fly past you. This is the underground parking level. As you can see, the damage down there, even further down just from the vibration or whatever going on. Now this is an interesting picture. This actually looks like me, but it's not me, and it's the exact same clothes I was wearing. How do you get like that? Well, the first time I saw the sprinklers through the whole process is leaving the building, going into the underground mall that looks like a mall that just closed at night. You know, the lights are on, everything's closed, and there's just a few people getting on out. Well, when I went through that sprinkler, you wouldn't believe how cold it is. It is freezing, that water. And then, a short while later, when the power's coming down on top of you and pelting you with all that dust, you get to look like one of the mud people there. And what I like is right here, this shows you this is a white shirt. That's about the only place that didn't get that dust. And that's exactly what happened there because that's what happened to me. Over here, on the right there is the 2 towers. That's probably the last time you're going to see the 2 towers standing. And over on this side is the various times outside where you get to see what it looked like being down on the street level there. Now in terms of, people wondered what have I learned, and I tried to think of some of the things in terms of me getting out of there. One of them is simulations drills. In terms of something as simple as a fire drill. Like from up here, I wouldn't know how to get out other than follow some exit signs. But
Okay, we have floor monitors.
Well, yeah, and that's how I got out of the building. That guy who said, "Come to my voice," he was actually one of the wardens, one of the assistant wardens, because the other warden didn't get there yet. But it turns, again, so another lesson learned, have an assistant warden. But it turns out that, sure enough, you have those drills, and like my buddy who I fly with, when we want to go practice something that you don't usually learn, like shut off 2 engines, double engine flame out, you can't just shut the engines when you're up in the middle of the air there, but you have a simulator. So you get to do simulations, you practice those scenarios, what you're gonna do, because you're not gonna have time to figure it out. It has to be second nature. Then you have staying focused, thinking ahead. Remember I told you, think of the 5, it's not any particular 5 things, it's just thinking ahead, what's coming up, what happened if, and so forth. Attention to detail. I walk the lobby, the underground mall, every day, twice, in and out. And it turns out, I can lollygag and think of like, blah, blah, blah. Well, I knew what was going on in terms of where things are. When I knew I wanted to be again, I have an engineering degree, not that I ever used it, but I knew when the tower was coming down, whatever it was, I want to be against something strong. And I knew that there were none down there. It's not like I had to go look for one, but I knew that wall would do. So again, when the towers came down in 10 to 12 seconds, again, I had to analyze, understand, instantly react, and get to that wall. And then you think of all the other stuff as well. Formulate plans. Even when they went after bin Laden, not did they just have plan A, they had plan B and C. Because A didn't work, they went to B quickly. Well, I was down there, I had plan A, plan B. My plan B was actually, or maybe plan C, was go down into the subway and work my way all the way through to the next station. And again, you gotta make these plans up on the fly because it's not like I was expecting this. But it turns out that plan into the subway didn't work because I looked into the subway and I actually saw a lot of smoke and figured that was probably not the place to go. Lead versus wait to be led. If I wait to be led, may not be here. Sense of urgency. Like I said, when Jan and Melissa got outside and one wants to make a phone call and the other one is just standing there, hey, really? You got to get them going. But it turns out that to sum this all up, the one thing I didn't put here is situational awareness is key. I mean, as long as you have a sense of what's going on, at least you can make some sound decisions and act accordingly. So again, just to know what's going on. Now it turns out, just gets to my military side, when the skies were closed, just in terms of some sense of normalcy, I was scheduled to fly 2 days later. I went in to go fly 2 days later, even though we weren't expecting to fly. I mean, nobody was flying. However, they did call me up, and this is like an 8-person plane, and they let me fly. They didn't even put an instructor with me. They just let me go, considering what I went through 2 days ago, so that was odd. But it turns out I already had orders to deploy overseas to the Persian Gulf at the end of September, before this happened. This was my reason to stay home. I didn't need to go. However, being second in command, my troops weren't going over there without me, and by then it was personal. Now, in terms of why we're all here, we're here to share the message. But the big thing is we get the magnitude of publicity, for lack of better words, because of the magnitude of the devastation. 2,749 people were murdered on those grounds that day. It turns out that 1,650 people have been identified. But that means 40% of them, 1,100, haven't been identified whatsoever. So that is hallowed ground, sacred ground, when you go down to ground zero. 220, and in terms of magnitude of the devastation, 22,000 remains have been recovered. Only 174 full bodies. By definition, that's more than 50% was considered a full body. But it turns out that every year, what we do to commemorate my 3 co-workers that are no longer with us, we typically used to go down by the water there. That's actually Jan and Melissa. This is where we get to spend some time together each anniversary. And with that, I'd like to bring Gordy up. Thank you.
Thank you.
As Chris mentioned, the World Trade Center, there are 110 stories off the ground. Mr. Yamazaki, he's the architect of these 2 buildings, had a radical new design. You know how you have columns in the center of the building and holds the buildings up? Then you build walls around it. World Trade Center had no columns. The entire support of the World Trade Center was on the outside exoskeleton. His design back then, because these buildings were so tall, he theorized, in a worst case scenario, a plane is coming from Europe. There'll be fog in New York. Pilot gets a little lost, smacks accidentally into the World Trade Center. His design of these 2 World Trade Center buildings was to withstand the impact of a passenger jet. Okay, not a little Piper Cub, but a passenger jet from Europe. The terrorists that attacked us, they were smarter than us. They didn't use a plane from Europe, they didn't use a plane from California or even Florida. They used planes that were local. They were from New Jersey, Boston, they were from Washington, D.C. These planes were loaded with fuel and they were headed out toward California, so you knew they had the maximum capacity filled of fuel. It was that jet fuel that started the combustion that melted the exoskeleton, which brought the building down. Mr. Yamazaki's design was proven correct though. When those two planes struck the two buildings, both buildings did not fall. You notice they stood, and they stood for 102 minutes. But that was critical because we needed that 46 minutes that Chris was mentioning. Let me just bypass a lot of these. February 26, 1993. This is the actual bombing. And this FBI photo here, that bomb that went off underneath the North Tower, they had to undermine the North Tower, strike the South Tower, then you kill all these Americans, thousands upon thousands of Americans in a matter of seconds. It created a crater 5.5 stories deep, 2 stories up, wiped out all the cars of that particular area of about the size of an American football field. So this is a massive, massive truck bomb. Gotta get used to this. Maybe I'll just use the mouse. Okay. As you can tell by my facial features, I'm Chinese American. And if you look up here, you see the World Trade Center is very close to Chinatown. It's only about a 15-minute walk for you folks. Now, Chinatown is super busy. There's really no place to play. So my playground is the entire financial district. The reason I say that's my playground is because at 4 o'clock, when that stock exchange bell rings, and on Saturdays and Sundays, the place becomes a ghost town. So this is where I learned to ride a bike, skateboard, play tag. By the age of 10, I pretty much owned Wall Street. It was fantastic. My real jobs, I do orthopedic surgery. One of my offices back then was on 35th and Park Avenue. For those of you who are familiar with that, we're about 3.5 miles north of Ground Zero. I love doing research. I was doing a paper of Eastern versus Western medicine on this one disease entity. I can go into any hospital in the United States, interview the patients, I get the Western perspective. But to make the paper legitimate, I also need the Eastern perspective. Well, near Chinatown is this hospital known as Beekman Hospital. It's called that now, but back then it was called Beekman Hospital. It's easier saying Beekman. Beekman, being so close to Chinatown, had a huge Asian population. So I was on my way there to interview a handful of their patients on this one disease entity. Keep in mind, I do not work there. I don't have privileges there, but I had permission to interview a handful of their patients on this one disease entity. As I'm heading down there, well, this is where Beekman is. As I'm heading toward the World Trade Center, I look up and I see the tower's on fire. My background is I'm a former combat medic in the U.S. Army, and many years later, after I graduated medicine, I went into the Air Force as a medical officer. But you don't need a military background to realize when you have 2 buildings struck by 2 separate planes at the same time, it's kind of like a no-brainer. This is not an accident. We're under attack. So instead of heading to my meeting down at Beekman Hospital, I decided to go toward the World Trade Center. And here's the flight plan. 2 planes came out of Boston, struck the World Trade Center. 1 plane came out of Dulles, came back in, and struck Wing E of the Pentagon. By the grace of God, Wing E happened to be under renovation at that time. But it did, however, kill 186 of our senior military personnel. Then, of course, the final one was Flight 93 that came out of Newark. These passengers, when they were airborne, they got word that planes were falling out of the sky and striking buildings. And when the hijackers declared themselves, it was kind of like pretty much a no-brainer. You knew you were going to die. You knew your plane was going to be used as a guided missile. So these 40 passengers, Todd Beamer was on that flight, and he's the one who coined the term that everyone uses these days, but prior to September 11, 2001, no one really used that term. In fact, I've never even heard of that term, but now he coined that term, let's roll. Okay, they retook the plane. That plane was airmarked for the Capitol building. That was the first day back from summer vacation. The Senate and Congress was together. So if that plane would have made it to the Capitol building, it would have wiped out our entire senior leadership. And they were able to retake the cockpit, but they could not overcome the hijackers. The hijackers inverted Flight 93 to try to shake these passengers away from the cockpit, and then they crashed in Somerset County. And this is our time frame when the first one hit and when the buildings came down. It took 102 minutes, which was very important. As I got to the base of Tower 2 came exploding down. And you can see the top of Tower 2 here tilting as it's coming down. That's key in the next couple of minutes when I show you other photos. And here's what Chris was talking about. It's a very unusual sight. You only see one tower standing. You know, maybe I'll just use the mouse. Might be easier than trying to do that. Okay. I say the term it was exploding as it was coming down because the World Trade Center is 110 stories off the ground. It came down between 10 to 12 seconds. For those of you with an engineering background, you realize when you have that much building coming down at that great speed, it generates a huge amount of pressure. So the building appeared to be exploding as it's coming down. Now you folks know what a grenade is. A grenade, when it explodes, it has a kill radius which shoots shrapnel in all different directions. But it has a kill radius of only 5 meters. If I set off a grenade over here in this corner, you folks aren't going to get hurt. You're too far away. Your eardrums will be killing, but you're not going to get hurt. When the towers came down, it had a kill radius of 4 blocks in all different directions. These things the news media didn't show you. It's not intentional, but it's the nature of being a reporter, and I'll explain that in a little bit. It had a 4-block kill radius. This is a color photo. You see Central Park up here. See New York City over here. This is where the towers are. Notice all this area. Oops, didn't want to do that. Okay, here we go. Got to remember not to touch the screen. Okay.
Yeah.
See this area over here that's covered in white dust? That's a 4-block kill radius. What the news media failed to tell the world on that day was that 13 to 16 buildings went up in flames and came down. That's a lot of buildings, okay? A 4-block kill radius is a lot. I wanted to show this police vehicle. When the towers initially came down, it's not smoke. Notice the tires of the car. It's kicking up dust. That's key. Dust was laden with asbestos, silica, glass, plastic, all the carcinogens that can give you cancers. Eventually, shortly after that, it became smoke when all these burning buildings started going up in flame. This is the Woolworth building. It's one of the tallest structures down there. I'm standing right over there, and let me see if I can get this to work. See these trees here? Whoever shot this video happened to capture me in the video. It wasn't staged, obviously, okay? But happened to capture me. That's me over here, and I'm gonna start the video, and then you're gonna see you notice that dust cloud came right over me? That's not the danger. The danger is what you can't see with a naked eye. Flying right over me because I hit the deck real fast. I was down on the ground real fast. What flew over me was glass, metal, building material, whatever you could think of, because that blast was a 4-block kill radius. It was a powerful blast that shot everything out sideways. You can't see that with the naked eye. All I can say is the person next to me, the gentleman to the next to me, he was about 2 feet to the right of me. He died instantly. He was struck by building material because he didn't go down to the ground. He stood up. This is a huge target. This is over 5 feet of a target. But when you lay down on the ground, your target is only that big because it's only the height of your head. So that's why I survived that one. You notice the building that went up in flames. Many of the buildings went up in flames after about 12 seconds. Chances of people getting out, pretty low at that point. If you can think about if you can get out of that building in 12 seconds, many people can't do that. This is the Deutsche Bank building, right here. Okay. Because we were attacked in 1993, the towers did not come down. No one really thought the towers were ever going to come down. When the towers were on fire, no one ran. It had the opposite effect. It was a magnet. People were coming toward ground zero when the buildings were on fire. It's not every day you see the towers on fire. So the Deutsche Bank building is very short. It's only 39 stories tall, but it's across the street from the the World Trade Center, and particularly Tower 2. And I remember Tower 2 came down first, and it had that 4-block kill radius. The top of Tower 2 tilted. This corner of Tower 2 here came down and made a gouge in the Deutsche Bank building. If you count the floors, the gouge is 20 stories long. And if you look very closely here, Tower 2 is dangling off the bottom of that gouge. Notice the windows down here. They're blown out. Notice the windows up there. They're pretty much somewhat intact, but they're blown out here. Case in point, as the building came down, the pressure kept building and building and building, and just exploded out. Okay. This is the World Financial Center, American Express building. This is the Winter Garden. It's made of glass. It's a greenhouse basically, and it has palm trees in it. And this is the American Express building. You notice a whole chunk of American Express building is missing. World Financial Center windows are blown out. Look at the Winter Garden. Glass does not stand a chance against a 4-block kill radius, especially when you're only across the street. It wasn't just commercial buildings, but residential buildings around the area were destroyed also. And the news media showed that we were looking at a hole in the ground. That's impossible. Totally impossible. You cannot have 13 to 16 buildings come down and have a hole in the ground. We were looking at a mountain. See these little people here? How tiny these people are? That's a mountain. The mountain was between 10 to 20 stories tall. We were looking at a mountain. I know I was looking at a mountain. I don't know what the news media was looking at, but I was looking at a mountain. And you can see over here how high the mountains can get, depending on where you're standing. And we're going to bypass this just to save time. This is a silhouette aerial view, Tower 1, Tower 2, and you see all the destruction where the towers were. But what's important is, look at the outside area, the 4-block kill radius. News media failed to show that part. October 2001, they started doing GPS. It was in its infancy, but it was still operational. This is Tower 1, Tower 2, the footprints. Notice the little dots. Those are the victims, 1 month after the attack. Obviously, over the years, there are more and more dots there, but this is just the first month. Notice where most of the bodies are. They're not in the towers. Not in the towers. So one of the things I usually mention to guests when they come down to the museum, so on September 11th, well actually, when they attacked us in 1993, and we started doing fire drills, instead of taking 8 hours to get out of the towers in 1993, we were able to evacuate everyone in 46 minutes in 2001. If we evacuated the World Trade Center in 46 minutes, how do you lose 2,749 people? Numbers don't add up. This is why. Because there was that 4-block kill radius that shot out and pretty much wiped out a lot of buildings, killed a lot of people in the process. I had a mother come to us, and she said, and it took her a long time to come to the museum. She goes, my daughter died in New York City on September 11, 2001. She doesn't work anywhere near the World Trade Center. How is it that she died in the World Trade Center? What I'm trying to say is the news media didn't intentionally try to fool you. No, there wasn't malice there. If you see the news tonight and you watch any news clipping and you watch that reporter, how much time did that reporter have in front of that camera? 15, 20 seconds tops. Do you think that reporter is going to report on the 39-story Deutsche Bank building that's on fire? Or you think they're going to report on this 110-story building that's on fire? 100% of news media throughout the whole world and the United States reported on the World Trade Center. So therefore the whole world got fooled into thinking everyone who died, died in the World Trade Center. When I came to my senses, the only thing I had on me were 2 Band-Aids, and I realized after looking at the carnage, there was nothing I could do about it. I was dressed in a suit, and I wasn't prepared for anything like that. So I figured if I can get to the nearest operating room, I can assist their surgeon in saving life and limb. I went to Beekman, I identified who I was. I don't have any ID on me. They don't know me from Adam. They couldn't use me in the OR because their surgeons were already busy in the OR, but they needed all the medical professionals to come off the street because the rest of the hospital was in dire need of medical support. He gave me the 4th floor conference room, and it's just like what you think a conference room looks like. It's empty in there, it's just myself in there. New York City is a modern metropolis. We assume modern cities have modern medical centers. But it was very surreal that day because on a hard conference room table with no sheet or mattress, I started to sew people back together again. I'm used to being in an operating room where I wear what we call scrubs and with a sterile gown over it. I have sterile instruments. I was there in a business suit, took off my jacket, had a shirt and tie on, not even wearing a mask, and just sterile gloves, and I'm leaning over patients, sewing them, putting them back together. It's very surreal because I'm used to having a nurse near me, a technician. I didn't even have a janitor near me, it was just me, one patient. These were the only instruments I had: a pair of scissors, forceps, and a needle holder. I would put it in a basin, pour isopropyl alcohol in it, slush it around, pour it out, repeat it over and over until the fluid came out clear, and I'll bring in the next patient. Not exactly the most ideal way of sterilizing equipment, but that's all I had back then. By noon, I was very thirsty. And by noon, they weren't sending any more patients to me. I just assumed because of our proximity to ground zero that we were saturated. They were diverting ambulances to the other 4 boroughs of New York City. It didn't dawn upon me. They weren't sending patients to me up on the 4th floor. It was because there was just no more survivors coming in. So that afternoon, I couldn't get any water in the hospital. The cafeteria has been converted into a trauma bay. There's nothing outside except 16 building that's on fire. It's nothing out there. No one's going to sell me anything. So the only thing I could do was go down to Chinatown. Prior to 2001, I had moved to New Jersey, but I kept coming down to Chinatown every single Sunday to go to church. And I knew that if I can get to that church, I can get some water. See that antenna? That's not just a TV antenna, but that's the only cell phone antenna back then. The only cell phone antenna. Back then, not everyone carried cell phones. When Tower 1 was struck that day, regardless of who your carrier was, you just lost cell service. The church I attend down at Ground Zero, it's a very old church. We have what we call landlines. If you folks don't know what it is, we used to plug a wire into the wall to talk on the phone. Now, my dad, who resides in New Jersey, he knew that of all 5 boroughs of New York City, there's only one logical place that I would seek refuge, and that would be at the church down in Chinatown. Dad had a landline. He had a landline, the church had a landline. He was able to call through. So at 8:20 in the evening, he was able to inform me that my sister Susan was in the World Trade Center. She didn't work in the World Trade Center. She was there for a 2-day meeting, of which the second day never came. Sis worked over here. See those vertical lines right there? That's these vertical lines right here. If I can get this to work, there we go. That's Windows on the World Restaurant. Sis worked for a company that went out of business in 2013, but it used to be one of America's largest computer companies. It's called Compact Computers. Compact was up there for a very powerful breakfast meeting. There were many companies up there. Compact sent in a 5-man delegation to represent Compact in that meeting. As guys, we know never, never, never wear a color shirt and a tie to a professional meeting. You can wear a color shirt and tie to any meeting, but not to a professional meeting. One of the guys on Susan's team came to work with a green shirt and a green tie. Okay, he had to come down to the Marriott Hotel, which is this little guy right here, but actually, right there. That's a better view of it. He had to come down to the Marriott Hotel to buy a white shirt to match his green tie before he could come back up to the meeting. When his elevator was at the bottom, Tower 1 was struck. He couldn't go up, but what he was able to do was call Houston, Texas, which is the corporate headquarters for Compact. They in turn looked up the next of kin, which was Dad, and of course Dad then got a hold of me that night. My whole world fell apart at that point. It was best that God was gracious or merciful to me and didn't allow me to know what happened to Susan earlier during the day. That would have been very ineffective in helping anyone. At our museum that closed forever and ever down at Ground Zero, that's a whole different story. But this is our story gallery right here. And if you go adjacent to our story gallery, if we were to stand in the center of the room there, it's a very sobering sight because surrounding you are hundreds and hundreds of pictures. There's only one picture, one victim, but there are hundreds and hundreds of pictures in there. September 11, 2001, we lost 2,749 people in a matter of seconds. So when you're standing in the center of the room here, as daunting as that sight is, you realize this is only a tiny, tiny, tiny representation of the amount of people we had actually lost that morning. Since September 11, 2001, we've lost a little over 4,000 more people. These people have died from cancers. We developed 69 different types of cancers, head traumas, amputations, infections, suicides, all related to 9/11. December 2022, our numbers went up to 7,000, and now that we're in September 2023, we've definitely exceeded. You figure about 3,000 who died that day, plus an additional 4,000 more. We've got about 7,000 people who have died so far. We continue to lose 4 people per week. Continue to lose 4 people per week. Are we going to lose more in the months and years ahead? Yes, we are. We are guaranteed, guaranteed. I say that with great confidence because I'm one of the statistics. I've got multiple cancers growing in me. I've gone through multiple surgeries, and my surgeons tell me we cannot get the cancers. I'm okay with it because I know where I'm going after this life. In the years after the bombing, as you can pretty much figure, I'm what we call a triple. I'm the only recorded triple in the history of New York City as it relates to the attacks of September 11, 2001. And the 3 things that you figured out that makes me a triple is I'm a survivor, I'm a family member, I'm also a rescue worker all in one. So my plate's kind of full, if you know what I mean. So in the years after the attack, many colleges, many universities, they invite me to be the keynote speaker at their commencement exercises. What I notice when I speak at these graduations, I decompress from that really full plate a little bit each time. 2018, I joined the Tribute Museum, and I noticed that when I speak in front of 2 to 20 people, or if I speak at a graduation of 10,000 people, I decompress from that plate the same amount. Now that our museum is gone forever, which is kind of sad due to political reasons and COVID-19, the museum down there, the artifacts weren't really the stuff that you see on display. The artifacts were the 350 docents, Chris, myself, and the other docents. So now that the physical museum is gone, I continue and Chris continues to give out talks, and we decompress each time we give out talk. We speak around the world, and we speak around the United States, and for this we're very grateful that you folks allow us to come here to give you our story. What we hope to impart to you, that you can tell your great-great-great-grandchildren what actually happened, because no one else is going to tell the world what actually happened here. We don't make up the stories, we have to back up everything we have with pictures and videos, so that you will know that, to authenticate that this is real. It's a pretty unique platform that we have. So as I conclude, and Chris joins me here, are there any questions on what it was like that day on September 11th? Raise his hand first.
So now, this is just one for now, just start with one, but it's, when you, both of you, like, when you realized, when you got out of immediate danger and you kind of realized that your life was like no longer in immediate peril, I mean, what did you feel, I guess, what was, I mean?
I'll take that. Immediate peril, during the whole entire day, in the back of my mind, we were always in danger. We never suspected those towers to come down, but when they first came down, I was so afraid. I was so scared. I figured if this is how Christ came back, it really surprised me because I didn't think this is how the end of the world was going to be. I had fear the entire day, but I had to change my hat. I had to put on this facade because people were relying on me to stop the bleeding. It never goes away.
Well, the first moment that I knew I was really in trouble was when the thing started coming down on top. But to answer your question, I was so focused, like I said, keep thinking ahead. The last task of the day was making sure my wife knew that I made it out of there, which was 5 hours later. So she thought she was a widow until then, and I was so focused, I wasn't gonna stop until I knew she knew I made it out of there.
We have to take it by hands.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you blame anyone for what happened?
I'm not theologically trained, and I've spoken in, I think about 7 churches where I gave a sermon. Do I blame anyone? I was angered, but also have to look at what God has given me, and I have to take what He has given me and make it for His glory, and that's why I do mine. Chris, he may have a different reason on why he does his. Do I blame anyone? I blame the people who killed my sister and all the other Americans down there. I've learned to forgive. Forgiving someone doesn't not necessarily say it's okay. It's not okay. I will never forget what happened. But I definitely, I forgive them, but I do not ever want to be in the same situation with those people ever again.
I don't have nightmares, but one day when I drank a little too much, it turned out that I was chasing that one guy up the stairs, you know who I mean, because I wanted to go get him. So somehow I never got him, but you know, that one person is, I guess, the figurehead that we finally got.
Yes, back there.
Our question is like, because you mentioned in your slideshow, you said like lead instead of like, you guys lead instead of waiting to be led. And you both guys did that, you being the rescue worker, and you just taking control of the situation, just going at it. Like, how did you guys didn't have a chance, like, when did you guys have a chance to like actually read and process what was going on? Because there was so much stuff going on. He was in the conference room taking care of people, and you were leading people out of the building, out the mall. So it was like, and then 2 days after that, you got deployed, and then you probably didn't, he didn't realize that his sister passed away, not even until like later on throughout the day after taking care of other people. Like, when did you guys get to process all of that, you know?
Process of grief.
Yeah, like just to have a chance to just sit down and like, you know?
The one thing is that I think I'm in a good state of mind in terms of I'm English, my mother, so it turns out maybe that stiff upper lip, or maybe it, what's that one thought that I always forget? Or maybe it just hasn't hit me yet. But the one thing is that when I did deploy, I did take the chance to overseas write down all these details. Now I know what I forgot. The main thing is, no matter how bad it was, what I went through, I didn't see the goriness. Everything was covered. And that has a lot to do in terms of your frame of mind. So, you know, the jumpers and so forth, when I got outside, everything was covered. So I really didn't see it. And then I'm good for another year. But it turns out, like, when I was deployed, I took the time a month later to write everything down. And then by talking about it, like Gordy said, whether it's 10,000 or 8 people, it's time to decompress. You don't keep it in, you let it out.
So for me, it took, because I love my sister very much, she was only 1 year older than I was. So we were 2 peas in a pod, we were best of friends. I would look at every single video, every single picture, and I knew exactly where she was because they captured her voice talking with the firefighters when she was trapped up there. She was the go-to person, that's why she was in charge of that meeting. And for 3 years, I accept that she died. What bothered me, what I couldn't come to grips with was, did she suffer when the building was coming down? Was she awake? And I find once someone from church said, you know what, there's a lot of smoke, she was rendered unconscious. She didn't feel anything when the building came down. It took 3 years for that. But it's not over then. We get a lot of people who say, the attack was 22 years ago. Put it behind you, let it go. What people don't get, and this part is super important, especially to us who are survivors, and because of the sensational part of being the September 11th World Trade Center. One of my colleagues at work, he's a surgeon, he said to me about a year after the attack, he goes, Gordon, just put it away, just put it away, because my dad, I love my dad very much, he died of a heart attack 5 years ago. I've learned to put it away. I miss him every day, but I've learned to put it away. You have to move on. And I look at Mike and I say, okay, thank you. And I get this a lot. I even had a pastor come up to me and goes, you have to let it go. Because I lost my sister, she died in a car accident, and we were really, really close. And I miss her, you know, I learned to put it away, put it behind me. And I thank her, but I don't answer these people, and I just walk away. Because I take cancer medication every day. There's a lot of problems, half my inside is missing from all my surgeries. I change my dressings twice a day, still. I sleep 4 nights per year, 4 nights per year. Most nights, I sleep for an hour, 2 hours, I wake up for a half hour, sleep another half hour, another hour, wake up, then I sleep a little again. On those 4 nights where I get 6 hours of sleep, that's a godsend. I'd love to get 6 hours of sleep, and that's very improvement. So with that's because of the post-PTSD. So when people tell me, let it go, put it away, kind of hard to do that when I'm reminded of this every day. And this is not even on the anniversaries, when the news media comes out and sensationalizes all this. This is just me just trying to get through each day, one day at a time. So, yes, ma'am.
Related to that, have either of you been through treatment for trauma?
It was there, it was available. Like I said, I thought I'm in a good place, so I didn't really seek that much treatment. I think I went once just to talk, but I talked about it anyway.
I had the opportunity of going through treatment, and of course, I write a lot of prescriptions, so obviously a lot of pharmaceutical companies are there giving me tons of samples, and my colleagues, they give me cases and cases of medication. I haven't taken any medication. I rely on prayer only. I don't recommend everyone do that. It's just that I thought that was best for me, and that's what I do. But I don't recommend what I do for everyone.
You know, treatments like EMDR, for example, have been effective with trauma cases, and I really appreciate you being honest about your experiences, and I agree that anyone who says put it behind you doesn't understand humanity and what we need. That's impossible. None of us can forget things that have hurt us and traumatized us. So we learn to carry these things, which I think you're doing, right? But we don't put them behind us.
And as part of the Trade Center family, Mount Sinai runs a program where they monitor everybody, not that they do anything, they just monitor you. But it turns out that they have the resources there that they remind you, they got counseling and so forth. So that's another opportunity every year.
Yeah.
It's kind of just a clarifying question, but Tower 1 was hit by the plane first and fell second?
Yes, that is correct.
The top part of Tower 2 was heavier. When Tower 2 was hit, it was hit at a lower floor, so it was a heavier top component. So when the exoskeleton melted, that came down first. That might be it for our meeting on time.
Questions? Well, we have about 5 more minutes if you.
Oh, sorry, I thought we were out of time.
I was worried, I'm always cognizant of time.
No, you're good, but we have another 5 or 10.
I just have a theoretical question. If another 9/11 happened at this age, like in this year, would there have been a better response than at when 9/11 happened?
Well, a better response in terms of what we've learned. I mean, back then, the protocol was, well, back then, you saw what it was like to get on a flight. You weren't, okay. Back then, you just walk on a plane. I mean, there was no security. If you go to a ball game, there was no security. You know, you just go in. But it turns out that obviously we learned they have security now. But back then, before 9/11, they knew about using planes as missiles. Like back in the mid-90s, they had Operation Bojangles somewhere on the Pacific there, where that's where what the plan was. Obviously, maybe we didn't learn for September 11th. But everything that we learned from 93, we used for me to be here, lessons learned. And then from this, when they built the new tower, you know, they incorporated all the best features to help prevent a 9/11. But this is always a possibility of it happening again.
when you say, you know, newer generation, we're not out of the woods, so to speak.
Oh, no,
Okay,
no, I
we
don't
are
mean
definitely
that.
not out of the woods, okay? And I don't speak for Homeland Security, but I can tell you one thing, Homeland Security does work. It's not a question of if they are gonna attack, it's a question of when are they gonna attack. We cannot stop all the attacks, and it becomes very obvious if you ever ride the subways of New York City. Homeland Security is good, but they're not that good yet. So whenever they even make the announcements when you're riding the train, if you see a suspicious looking backpack sitting on a chair and there's no one there, notify someone, because they can't thwart everything. And I do have some inside sources, and they tell me things that the general public does not need to know, but they have found additional threats and real threats that they had to deactivate, but the general public does not need to know this. So it's a matter of when, not if. You have a question?
Yeah, just kind of building off this question in terms of like, future protocol for if, God forbid, something like this happens again. Do you know of any protocol, now with the knowledge of like, how you mentioned the 4 block sort of, area of, what was the term?
Kill radius.
Kill radius, yeah. Is there sort of a protocol now to get everyone out of a kill radius now? Like, because you said that everyone kind of flocked towards to like look. If something like that were to happen, would people on the ground get everyone far away?
I think because the towers actually came down, people now know that if you see a building on fire, you're not gonna head toward the building that's on fire. You will watch it in the distance, but you won't walk toward the towers, if you don't mind me mentioning this. So when I said that people were flocking toward the buildings, keep in mind, no one's ever seen the buildings come down. In 1993, they attacked us, the building stood. So people were just, thousands were just coming toward the towers. Now, after the towers have already come down, years later, now people know when you see a building on fire, you don't go toward that building, because you don't know if it's gonna come down.
No, they learned fast. When I came out of the tower that day, after the tower collapsed,
The first tower.
nobody was coming in.
Yeah.
Nobody was coming in.
When
By
that
then, they
first tower
finally figured
came
it out.
In that video, you notice when the first tower came down, first thing you see is people just running as fast as they could away from the area. They didn't do that when the towers were burning, but they did after the first tower came down. And definitely when the second tower came down, the place was already deserted. People were gone.
I was just one, I was just a baby.
Actually, you were more like about 20 miles away.
Yeah.
No, not 20 miles
Well,
away.
no,
You were more like
you're
about-
talking about 6, 7 miles away.
No, he was, yeah, 6, 7 miles away.
136?
Yeah.
I went to school up there,
Yeah.
City College.
Yeah, 6, 7 miles away, you were pretty safe.
Really?
Yeah, you're pretty safe.
Crazy.
Yeah, but it turns out that obviously the debris ain't gonna totally go through the full building and just wipe out a whole full block. But yeah, you're gonna have the dust cloud and everything, even the stuff falling. But to your point, yeah, everything's done, the projectiles are gonna go take out whatever's path is taken, whoever's within that path.
Oh, yeah, I was just, like, architecturally, like, the buildings are just, like, amazing, and you were talking about how they had an exoskeleton, which made them unique. I was wondering, do you think, like, if it had, do you think that exoskeleton contributed to debris? Do you think that made it worse because there was concrete on the outside, or better because there was less glass, like?
It wasn't concrete on the outside, it was all steel.
It wasn't?
No, it's all steel.
Interesting, so is that one of?
It actually made it better, it saved a lot of lives. It bought us 102 minutes. The buildings did not come down. 102 minutes is a long time. Not a long time, but we just needed 46 minutes to make sure Chris got out.
Well, actually, it took me an hour and 10 to get that.
Yeah, but you noticed there was
46,
no one in there.
yeah, but 46 minutes got all those other people out. And what did save us is the time of day, because if this happened later in the day, like noon, like the other 93, I wouldn't be there. It was estimated, I forgot what, third of the capacity, It was estimated a lot less people were there because of Monday Night Football the night before was the primary election going on. It was the first day of school, and then the time of day, 8:46. Some people don't come in until 9, 9:30, 10. So I got lucky in terms of the time of day.
Sir?
Were many of the other buildings, if not all of them, not just in the area, but in the city, were they evacuated at all from, say, like the other skyscrapers, like Empire State or anything like that? Were they also?
At the museum, people were evacuating in Europe.
Wow.
They weren't even just evacuating New York City, they were evacuating around the world. People were running to their school, their children's school, and grabbing their kids and pulling them out of school. Because no one knew where the next terrorist attack was gonna be. As far as Europe, they were evacuating like real fast.
I was actually in Prague, Czech Republic when it happened. So we had just started language school there, and my students came in, because it was afternoon where I was, came in and said, "There's something on the TV," and we went in and thought it was a movie trailer. And then we realized what was happening, and none of us could contact our family members because all of the phone lines were jammed, you know, and we didn't really have access to, we didn't have cell phones then, we didn't have access to internet easily, and so yeah, it was terrifying from there.
I know it's about time for some to head to another class. We'd like to take a picture.